Everyone's is muted, so you're good to go.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you for joining me this afternoon for our special education Q&A as we reopen Free Lake schools starting on September 15th. I wanted to take a moment to thank those families who submitted questions for today for our discussion, and also to thank CPAC who compiled and organized the questions for today. With that said, I want to jump in right away. We have an hour for this presentation and it will go by quickly. I also want to say that this is a general informational presentation, and due to privacy and confidentiality issues, we cannot discuss specific students or scenarios. So following the presentation, myself, along with Ashley Boulay and Meredith Foy, are available to answer follow-up questions by email or phone, and I will certainly relate that, our contact information at the end of the presentation if you do not already have it. So I'm going to start with a recap. So as everyone knows, Free Lake schools will be reopening on September 15th in a hybrid scenario, essentially week in school in person and a week of remote education. The students will be broken up into two cohorts, cohort A with last names from A to K, and cohort B with last names from L to Z. All of this is very clearly noted in our district calendar, so that is available on the Free Lake website with the calendar. So for this hybrid scenario that we have, our high needs group will be going back to school, or are eligible to go back to school full-time in person. Those are students with significant and complex needs who spend over 75% of their school day outside of the general curriculum. They are all of our preschool aged students with disabilities, students who require augmentative communication devices, students who are in foster care, group home or other congregate care or are currently homeless, students who are duly identified as English language learners and special education students, and students who cannot engage in remote learning due to disability-related needs. So breaking that down for Freetown-Lakeville. All of our students in the following areas will be going back to school, are eligible to go back to school full-time starting on September 15th. Our pre-K students, the students in substantially separate programs, which includes life skills, our social emotional learning program, our PLP, our personalized learning program, and our PLP transitions program at the middle school. Those are all students who are eligible to return to school full-time. And the goal is, and our orders from the DESE are to provide as much in-person instruction for this high needs group as possible and feasible, obviously keeping health and safety protocol and guidance at the forefront of decision-making for the district. In terms of these small cohorts, the substantially separate programs are smaller and have a much easier time of meeting the distancing requirements of 6 feet, and they are able to all come back to school in that setting. The goal, however, is to have these students in these small, protected cohorts and to minimize the adult footprint and a lot of the, the in and the outs between classrooms, and it will affect some of our inclusion students, as I will mention in a moment. So the goal is, just like you're doing at your homes and in your lives, creating small pods of people, in this case students, who will remain together for much of the school day while they are here with us. With that, I'm going to jump into some specific questions from the prepared questions for us. And I want to talk about the IEPs and service delivery first. So just like in the spring, when the entire district went to remote learning, the IEPs will remain in full effect during this hybrid time frame. So the IEPs are not going anywhere. They're intact. They're a legal document that will have no impact of whether your child goes to school in a hybrid model or in a full-time in-person model. Of course, the teacher and the district is responsible for the IEP. The teacher is also responsible for collecting the data, and the teacher or service provider is responsible for writing the progress notes. So similar to the progress notes that we submitted to all of our families in June, it will have a similar effect, except that we will have the students in person for at least 50% of the time, and some students will be coming to school 100% of the time. In terms of what service delivery for students with disabilities will look like in this new normal as we transition from hopefully a hybrid to a more in-person model as the data and the health department and numbers dictate, what will the service delivery look like? So students will receive a consistent schedule of classes, services, interventions, and therapies as outlined and signed in the accepted IEP. Students will have structured learning time to access the state standards. Students will have frequent access and communication with teachers, paras, related service providers, and other trained staff to ensure participation. Question. My child does not meet the criteria definition of high need, however, is also a student with a disability. What will the services look like for my child in a hybrid model? In this case, the student is going to get both in-person and remote instruction per the definitions that we just discussed. An emphasis, according to the DESE, will be placed on providing as many services in person and feasibly as possible. So the goal for special ed students who are coming back in a hybrid week on, week off situation, the goal is to, first of all, consult with families prior to the start of the school year. So we have 10 days leading up to September 15th, where your teachers and ed liaisons will be reaching out to you to discuss how the spring went and discuss your thoughts and your goals for the coming at least semester going forward. We are going to try to schedule related services, speech, OT, PT. We're going to try to schedule those during the students' on weeks that they are in school to avoid, if feasible and possible, having to address the remote services and all of those accompanying issues. So the goal is to have those services in person, and obviously that parents will be discussed with the parents prior to, and then in their week that they are doing remote learning, have a paper-based activity just for reinforcing skills. So that will take a lot of onus and burden around providing those services at home or facilitating those services with your child. Moving on. So my child meets the criteria for high needs and receives most of their services in a substantially separate setting. However, there's an element of inclusion in the IEP. How will inclusion services be provided if my child is expected to remain in their small cohort? So due to the constraints of social distancing and wanting to bring back, as many students as safely and feasibly possible, we are going to try to make every effort to have an inclusive experience, whether that is, doing that remotely with other students in those programs, or being able to creatively, depending on the child's age and level of development, make an inclusive activity for those students during this time. So the goal is that we want to keep that sort of pod, that small cohort, from mixing into larger cohorts, which then nullifies the hard work that everyone is doing, trying to maintain their space and to maintain appropriate social distancing. So similar to the spring, inclusion is going to look different than it did pre-COVID. So I will get into that when we talk about the process and the procedure with the IEP teams and whatnot. I'm trying to answer as many questions from this list as I can in our time, in the times that we have. If a student has a one-to-one on their IEP, how will that work if a student is doing remote learning? So the one-to-ones are a team determination that the student is going to need some level of access and support in order to access the materials while at school. So if a student is doing remote learning and has a one-to-one, that would be a very unique and a situation that I am not familiar with. Students with one-to-ones tend to be naturally located within our high need group. If you have a specific question concerning, your child has a one-to-one and you're doing remote learning, you should contact me after this presentation. Not right after, but in the coming days. And we can talk about your individual situation. How will one-to-one paras be working with their students if there is social distancing in-person learning? So the classrooms are making every effort to maintain their 6 feet of social distance, in addition to having the PPE on for the duration of the school day during class time. So if the PPE is there to minimize the spread if there is going to be a less than 6 foot distancing figure that we are looking at. There are some students in the high need areas that we're going to have to be, just by virtue of the student's development and need. Perhaps they need assistance with toileting or other functions. Then the staff will have all of the appropriate DESE mandated PPE, and that will be provided over the course of the student's time at school. So, and that's why the PPE is so important, and we put our order in very early in mid-June under the superintendent's leadership. Another question under the IEP and para section: will there be extra help for children with an IEP? So tutors, free or pay out of pocket. So I did recently learn of a free tutoring program that is set up through college-age students. I believe it was Brown, UMass Dartmouth, MIT, it might have been BU, but I can certainly share that through CPAC for those families that would like to take advantage of that. Another IEP related questions: will students receive small group or one-on-one services during the same schedule that their IEP requires? And what does that look like? So in order to keep our groupings as small and as close to that core group of students as possible, our related services might look a little different than what is provided typically pre-COVID and certainly than in the spring. So if the students are with us in person, there will be a combination depending on the particular student, depending on the IEP and student need, the age and development, and how the service is being delivered, whether it's in small group or one-to-one, that our related service folks are going to be looking to maintain that small group and interaction, but it might look differently than it did. That could mean, pulling students for their services, if that is possible. If a student gets a one-to-one service, that will happen. If the student is in a small group and might have groups pulled from different cohorts, we will have Chromebooks available, and their students will be scheduled to participate within their group setting, within their classroom setting in their area with their Chromebook and be participating at the same time remotely, even though they might be in person receiving that instruction. And again, these are all the scheduling for these students. The teachers are back on Monday, August 31st, and we have 10 days of professional development for a lot of work to happen, a lot of professional development around technology and these formats. And also the special education staff will be reaching out and making individual contact with all of the families and then developing a plan, an individual plan for the students, which I will talk about also in a few moments.
Liz, I have a question. You said you didn't know about the one-on-ones. In the spring, the one-on-ones actually did remote learning with the kids.
Okay, I'm going to ask if this is not an interactive presentation, so I'm going to ask to please remain muted. So the Zooming is going to look, again, this is a very different scenario than what we had in the spring. We have had some time, we've had a lot of DESE guidance, we've had a lot of learning in place, all of us professionally, and it's just there, in terms of the one-to-ones, the remote is not going to be, it's going to look different. We have signed on, as all of you have read in the superintendent's corner. We have TECA, we have some families homeschooling, we have some families coming in, students coming in full-time, and some families are opting for remote. The remote in those situations is going to look different than it did in the spring, or that it did in extended school year. And the reason for that is our teaching staff and our faculty staff are going to be here on site teaching students. So that's why we're making other arrangements for certain students within some sub-pocket groups. Okay. Another question related to IEPs and paras. Will the children leave their classroom for their predetermined IEP services, speech or OT or inclusion? So again, it's going to depend on your child's disability and what the service is. Certainly if there was a one-to-one scenario of a speech service that the child was meeting individually with the service provider, that can still happen. We could have the teacher push into the classroom and the program to deliver the service, or if it's in a group or small group, that could be happening virtually while students are in class. So students will be leaving the classroom, just not in the volume and in the manner that they did prior to COVID, because again, we want to keep everyone in school and we want to minimize that footprint of being out in larger groups and in larger areas. How will paras interact with students during in-person or fully remote learning? So when students are in school, the paras are going to work with the students, trying to maintain, while at all feasible and practical, the 6 foot of distance that is required. We know for our students who have more significant and complex behavioral and medical needs that that is going to need to be minimized to maybe 3 feet. Or if you've got a situation where, again, a student is being toileting or having other issues, or a student that is hand-to-hand, that's the child is still going to be able to access the para and access whatever they need. There will just be a heavy and vigilant approach to cleaning and the PPE protocol as determined and guided by the state and the CDC. During remote weeks, the students will be participating in the TECA program primarily, unless they have opted to do a more traditional homeschooling opportunity. I want to talk a little bit now about masks. So generally speaking, masks are recommended for everyone. In terms of the DESE guidance, masks for pre-K students up through grade 1 is going to be recommended. And we certainly appreciate the efforts that families are making to have their children get used to what that is, having the mask on, you know, taking mask breaks and the like. For grades 2 and up, the masks are required. However, as noted in my last communication, if there are medical needs or there are behavioral or disability related concerns that make the wearing of masks not possible, there is not a punitive measure. We'll work with the child, and we certainly would need to educate the child, and there's not going to be you have to leave the room or you have to leave the space. The students will be taking a break, trying to maintain social distance, and the staff will always have the PPE on when it relates to, you know, working with that student. What type of facial coverings will the teachers be wearing? Well, the teachers can wear a cloth mask of their liking that they can bring from home. We will also have those surgical masks available for teaching, faculty, paras, related service, and whatnot. So back in June, we ordered a very large, bulk at discounted rates of gloves, of disposable gowns, of masks, of goggles. We have full clear face shield, like a welder's mask that is completely clear through. And for our, as approved for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program and also ASHA, we did purchase a number of clear masks for especially our service providers, our speech and language and other, young children's service providers, so that students can see their facial features and their mouth moving as their language is developing, so they will see their face. It's called My Clear Mask. You can see, you can wear it and you can still see, I don't know how that sounds, but you can still see the therapist's mouth clearly through the mask. Many children with disabilities or behavioral situations are going to have a hard time wearing a mask. So teaching staff knows about this. They will try to they're going to work the mask wearing, the health and safety protocols, the hand washing, the sanitizing. That's going to become part of the fabric of a classroom when the students come back. So they're all going to be learning about wearing masks. They're going to be as accommodating as possible for students who are having a challenging time. And again, the staff and other students will have the PPE and masks on. So if we keep in our pods and we follow all of the social distancing, we should be able to maintain our in-person operations through the fall. And again, a question, last question on masks. How will problem with the masks be handled for the high needs students? Again, there is the medical exemption. Young students with more significant disabilities, neurological disabilities, autism spectrum might have more difficulties. So the teachers and the school is aware of that, and part of the professional development of all teaching staff and faculty. We have a medical doctor coming in. We've got school nurses. We have a lot of material to go through. And they're going to talk about all of the PPE, safety protocols, and standards and whatnot. I want to talk a little bit about what it's going to look like when the students go back to school in terms of IEP development, evaluations and reevaluation, things that are were left over from the spring. Either families opted to have an in-person meeting, or they could have opted to, perhaps they had a virtual meeting. So here is how we're going to address that in the fall. So first, we have been graciously allowed to have our school psychologist, and the school psychologists have graciously offered to start our evaluations, to get a jump start in the 10 days leading up to the school year. So starting Monday, August 31st to Monday, September 14th, the school psychologists are going to be working with families to arrange a testing date and time and specifics regarding the evaluation. And they will be the students can come into their respective schools, receive an evaluation, their psychoeducational evaluation, and that will help us work back some of that backlog from the spring. So we're currently, for that 2-week time frame, going to focus on those March and April evaluations that were unable to be completed due to the shutdown. So currently we have 3 school psychologists who are going to be working on this particular project. We have Karen Kent for AES and FES. We have Allie Flynn, Dr. Flynn at the middle school, and we have Dr. Hartman, Betty Hartman, who is going to be working on Grace and the high school. So if you get a call from one of these service providers offering you to have your evaluation time for the psychoeducational evaluation, I would strongly recommend taking that. We have designated areas in each of the 5 buildings that have been selected due to their proximity to the front of the building, and either high ceilings or air ventilation as well. We also have ample PPE for the providers to use, and that is all set up and established for them. The procedure, if you get that call, there's going to be and the school psychologist will speak with you about this. We have a Q&A that the school psychologist will discuss with you on the morning of the evaluation. It is basically written by our nursing staff. Just ask some of those screener questions. Did your child have a temperature today? Is the child feeling well? Those medical type of questions. If the child is not feeling well, obviously the child should not be brought in for an evaluation. So the school psychologist will meet you right outside the front door of the school building, and they will take the student into the testing area and conduct the testing. So students should dress comfortably. They might be seated for a period of time, and obviously the school psychologists work do have breaking, natural breaks, depending on this children's level of fatigue and whatnot. So the students should wear PPE. So they are invited to bring in their own cloth mask. If they do not have one, we will have cloth masks available for them. And obviously we have fresh pencils, and for the written portions, the pen and paper portions of the evaluations. So that's what the 2 weeks leading up to school looks like. In the other, when school starts on the 15th, our teams are going to be tackled with a number of things. They're going to be tackled with working through the backlog of evaluations and meetings from the spring. That is going to occur simultaneously as the district is addressing the new needs that come up starting in the September for the 2020 to 2021 school year. So we will be, if your IEP is due at the end of September or October or in the fall, we're going to be conducting evaluations and team meetings while we're also working off their backlog and having team meetings. So I will add something else that we're going to be doing so the teams are also going to be looking at the issue of compensatory services. So that will also be work that our department will be doing, and works in the teams with our school teams and our families and parents to make the students' IEP teams, determining compensatory services. Again, just keep in mind, we have a lot going on. We've got our backlog from the spring left over. We have our current responsibilities for the new school year, and we also have to be working on the compensatory COVID-19 compensatory service teams. So we will get to that backlog in chronological order, so as to when those were naturally due in the spring. So keep in mind that more information will be forthcoming, especially as the students enter school and we return to learning. One other item I also wanted to mention: in the 2 weeks leading up to the start of the new school year, our 10 PD days, the teachers are also going to be doing a couple of different things. In the spring, when we abruptly closed, we had remote learning plans that we culled together. What services were approximately half of what the student schedule was, and we issued those. There might have been communication between the teachers and the families or liaison. And this year, because we have time to reflect and we've learned lessons and have additional guidance, and we have months under our belts with this sort of unusual scenario that we are all living in. So in that 2 weeks, the teachers, your child's assigned special ed teacher liaison or related service provider, if they don't have educational services, will be, making that outreach to you, having that input and participation. And then we are going to be developing, for the outset of the new school year, an individualized learning plan. So that is going to set forth, suppose you have a high needs student, that person is going, that your individual learning plan is going to indicate you're currently receiving in-person educational services and what those look like. They're also going to break out if the district has to go hybrid or full remote. What is that going to look like for that child? So it's going to be different, obviously, than what is written in the IEP, but provide for those services and a free appropriate public education in a more robust model of instruction if everyone needs to leave school. That's going to be scheduled, that's going to be outlined for you as families in September, so that there will not be, any issue if for some reason we have to transition quickly, or, we don't know what the future holds with regard to that. So those individual learning plans are going to be, just like they were in the spring, going to be emailed to you, and we will have those printed in the files for students. So that is new information based on the constantly evolving and changing guidance and mandates that we receive from the DESE. We talked about compensatory services and those issues and the individualized learning plans last Thursday. Okay, some specific question regarding evaluation and progress reports. Any other details about spring evaluations? Obviously, we're going to be looking at both of those areas and working diligently to work through all of the students that require evaluation. The issue regarding specific progress reports and access to curriculum standards and what that exactly looks like for your child is going to be discussed with your teacher when they, reopen, set up their classrooms for the school year. So there's going to be like a rubric and a grading standards, and certainly the children will have to abide by those standards. Another interesting question regarding inclusion. So inclusion students, we are going to, the students will be going back in their alphabetically provided areas, the cohort A from A to K, and then the L to Z in cohort B. So those students will, if those students have small group pullout or other pullout, again, this is going to be an area that the individual learning plan addresses. So if your student is going back full-time, in-person instruction starting September 15th, we are going to let you know what that looks like for the student, and if there's going to be a difference, say the student is going to participate remotely in their speech program, that will be outlined in that document, as opposed to being pulled out physically, depending on the situation. So that's the parent consult will be conducted, but it is not an area like that requires an IEP team meeting or an amendment, much like those remote learning plans that we had in the spring did not require a specific consent component. Again, our whole goal here is to bring as many students as we can for in-person daily instruction while maintaining the safety and health protocol for all of our students and staff as well. I have some operational and planning questions. You know, will my child have access to the adjustment counselor? Yes, the adjustment counseling services are still in full effect. And they know to certainly prepare. It has been harder for some students than others to be, you know, at home learning remotely for a number of months. And certainly they are going to be, you know, in tune to those, you know, social stressors in reacquainting with school and transition and learning a new schedule, and also learning the new environment that they're going to be living in. That is their area of expertise of our adjustment counselors. I had another question about how many kids are going to be in a class. So it really depends on each specific class. So it depends on, you know, the age and development of the class. Generally speaking, the class lists that I have seen are anywhere from 5 to the 12 range is, I'd say, generally average, but you should consult with you know, individual classrooms in terms of what those numbers are. So roughly, you know, by splitting the alphabetical situation, we have split, you know, the class essentially in half. So you can, you know, if you're used to certain numbers of classes, students in your child's class, it's going to be about half. The principals and the teams of, for our feasibility studies, have done measurements, adjusted desks to be able to, you know, gauge how many students will safely and in accordance with the guidance and guidelines be able to be maintained in the classroom. I have another question. Do they have outside time? So depending on the specific student, the development and age, and any obviously factors, medical or safety factors of specific students, outside instruction, you know, is going to be permissible. So obviously that's going to be weather dependent. But if there are going to be certain areas that are set up at each school. And so the goal is to get kids outside if that is, if that's feasible and practical for the content, the age of the child, development, etc. Question, will there be notifications going out indicating whether your child has been prioritized? And if so, what is the timing? I would say that I have been working here with some assistance from our SPED administrators. We are 90% done with notifying families, which we did so individually, to let them know that their child is indeed prioritized for learning and will be, is eligible to receive in-person instruction starting on September 15th. So I did have some questions about what the, is it fluid? Is there a fluid exchange between, a child might start out as being hybrid, and can the students, switch in between the learning plan settings? So basically, we're asking that if families have opted for the TECA component, and we realize that some of you are still making those decisions. If they're opting for the TECA component, we ask that you maintain that through a semester of learning, and I believe the date is January 25th. So certainly, we'd ask that you keep it, just because there's going to be more difficulty in transitioning back and forth between those models, and we want to have consistency in the child's educational program and try to not have it as disjointed as possible. We also, for these cases, will need to make sure that we have the facilities, the space, and the distancing when these requests come in. So that is why we have looked to that January date in order to have like a stretch of time that we know what the student will be doing and what educational learning plan they will be engaging in. So moving on, if the district lands in, but before I get on to that, so one of the things I highlighted in my memo that I think is worth repeating here. So again, very different scenario than we had in the spring. So DESE has ordered us that, if the school district faces a situation that the health and safety numbers are going to warrant that, we go to a remote model, that does not mean that the students who are in our high needs group are automatically going to go to that remote model. So again, it's going to, depend on what the circumstances and situation, what the situation is with regard to the school closure, the district numbers, and those, are going to be fact specific. But, the high need students, as long as it is safe, appropriate, and feasible to maintain their in-person learning, we could have a situation that only the high need students are back to school for a certain period of time, when all the others might be, learning remotely. So again, it's going to be very, we're going to work together, and it's going to be very case dependent on what that will look like. And certainly our staff, our paras, administrators are all on site, whether it's going to be a remote situation or it's going to be an in-person situation. So if the district lands in a situation where we move from the hybrid model to full remote, can you tell us more about the instruction or service model of delivery? So I would say, generally speaking, it is going to look more synchronous, more actively engaged, and similar to our extended school year service delivery, where it was just very structured, very regimented delivery of services. So, so that does not, it's just a very different time, and that is why the state mandated the districts to come up with these 3 plans and to be able to have them identified, what we're going to do, so that we're able to move if that is absolutely necessary. For the instructional piece, and as we talk about, maybe moving from hybrid to remote, and what the implications of that are, Or if students who, have the para support and they've been prioritized for in-person instruction, but a family opts for remote, the guidance that we've received, from DESE and from legal is that we would need to make provisions for home-based services if we're not able, and if it is feasible, obviously, to provide those services in school. So if you, for example, have been offered full-time instruction, but you're opting to not utilize that and to go remote, that is not a situation where like the para is going to go to your house, or we're going to have remote services in your home. When DESE has spoken in their guidance about what that looks like, it's when the in-person educational environment is not possible. We're either closed or it's just not feasible or safe to do so. In those situations, that's not a situation where we would be providing home-based services. If, for example, we have a situation where, as the writer notes, we have a situation that the parent wants, the student is, say, high need or even in a hybrid, and we have to go remote. So, for those high need students, we're still going to find ways that we can provide some services, if possible, in person, whether that be in a home setting or community, and those are going to be very case and fact specific. So if you have specific questions around that, you should please, get in touch with us, after the presentation. A couple more, just random question and informational questions that I received. How will eligibility be conducted? So the district is opting for the accuracy and validity of the tests for the in-person psychoeducational evaluation. That's going to provide the team with very rich information around your academic achievement and also your cognitive ability and an IQ score. That's going to help us engaging, disabilities and eligibility, and we are going to make sure that we don't have those evaluations called into question or the validity of them by making sure that we do conduct the evaluations as appropriate for the professional, psychological, school psychology domain. Okay. I did have some general questions around socialization. Will children be discouraged from socialization? I would say no, but socialization is going to look different than what it did, pre-COVID. We're going to try to maintain that 6 feet of distance, and kids will have to socialize in a more social distance format. Obviously, socialization is an important part of a school's educational experience, so we want to be able to provide safe but alternate ways for socialization. We also had a question about, so if I have a high need student and they're going remote, what might that look like? So we do have instructional staff, and we are electing to use the TeachPoint online program for those very rare cases that we have a high need student who is cannot access the TECA or other online platform. We will have an appropriate, developmentally age appropriate tool and program to use with some support. So, we want to reiterate on behalf of the superintendent and myself, if you are have a child in a high need category and you've been invited to attend school full time, we would just strongly recommend that you do so. Obviously, there are individual cases concerning medical needs and other issues certainly that that we will honor, and that certainly health and safety measures come first. Had a question on are paras or teachers going to have training on how to conduct Google and Zoom sessions? So I mentioned earlier that we have a very robust and busy 10 days of learning and professional development, such that we will be experts in the Google Suite and remote learning by the end of the 10-day period. Again, more questions about PPE. To take the guesswork out of which PPE is going to be appropriate for which situation, again, we're following DESE guidance. DESE has a list of activities and what PPE has been recommended through the CDC guidelines to keep both the staff and the students safe. So again, there's going to be very ample training. We have ordered a lot of PPE, and that is going to be addressed in depth prior to the schools reopening and us having students in place. A point about coming in for meetings. So as has been a theme with this COVID situation, we want to maintain as minimal of an adult footprint in our school buildings as possible. So for this fall, whether you had a team meeting that was due in the spring or whether you have one that's coming up, we will be conducting remote team meetings. So we will have all of the team participants there, and we will have similar to what many experienced and what you're experiencing now through Zoom. You will have a full and robust team meeting, just done separately through the Zoom or Google platform. In following up, so if you have a meeting, you have a remote meeting, your child's IEP expires in, say, October, the IEP services are going to be written for the 12-month time frame from, say, October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. The IEPs are going to continue to be written as though the student were present in school and there was no COVID. So those, important IEP services on the service delivery grid will be written for fully in-person IEP scenario. And that's important because those are fallback rights for students and their families. That is what the students have stay put to in the event that there may be a dispute. So IEPs are not being, pared down or, carved to accommodate for this. That's when that individual learning plan is going to take place. I'm going to mention another example of this because I think it is important. So, if we have a situation where the student is coming back full-time in person, but is not going to be able to go to their group speech because it's pulled with a student from class A and B. The students are very similar in terms of their needs, but they're being pulled from different classes, therefore making the cohort larger, therefore causing the footprint of new people to grow. So that could be a situation where the student is accessing the group speech in a virtual, a synchronous virtual format in an area within the classroom, a certain area that has been designated, but that is something that's going to be outlined for you in that individual learning plan. It will, indicate the services and then just say, because a pull-out speech would typically be a grid B service, And that might look differently. The student might be in there just a different setting, and they might be having that sort of pushed in even virtually. But the whole point of that is to just let parents know. So we're providing that opportunity for consult, and then a situation where we're informing the parent of what that learning looks like, because we already know from the spring that might look differently than how it is typically provided. So that's how we look at FAPE in this COVID world. So I did have some questions regarding, pre-K. So all of our pre-K for the, 3, 4, and students who are on that cusp of the, 5th birthday, they will be coming to school full time. They will not have on and off weeks. So there's a neurotypical peer model in that program. You will be coming to school full time. We looked at a number of different models. We opted to keep the model, the needs of the students with that tried in the mornings. And then we have we have 2 intensive pre-K, which are more of a subset. It's an inclusionary experience within the classrooms. Those students are coming back to school right away, full-time in person, starting September 15th. For the pre-K, Mr. Ward at FES is going to be communicating with appropriate families. We're going to have the Tuesday and Wednesday, the 15th and 16th, we're going to have orientation that will be split up into 2 groups to keep them smaller. And then the integrated pre-students will go back full-time on Thursday of that week, the 17th. And just if you're one of the pre-K group, Friday, those integrated pre-K are not in school. So those students in the integrated pre-K will be coming to school on Thursday. The families may elect to come on one of the orientation days. And then they start off with their full week that following week of school. Again, keep in mind, please consult the calendar, and those couple Mondays in September are professional development days that we are fitting into our calendar. So so please note those as for our questions. Just a point again about cleaning and safety. If the question is, if for whatever reason there's a situation where someone in either the school or class becomes ill or exposed, what will be the process and the quarantinings. So all of those district level directives and school-based will remain intact. So the schools and the superintendents all have information that they will be sharing with their back to school packets about the procedures and protocol in place. They are very directive from DESE, and so we have maintained following those guidelines to the letter on those particular issues. I did have a question about lunch. This is going to be a school-based question. Again, most students or many students will be having lunch in their particular classrooms, but there may be pockets due to spacing and size arrangements that smaller groups scheduled. I'm thinking particularly of our high school, might be utilizing the cafeteria. So those specific details will be coming from your schools and your school administration. So looking at our time and just looking over our questions, I think we have covered all of the important areas that you will need to know about as families. We have addressed, generally speaking, the different areas that I was given, mask, PPE, IEPs, cleaning, evaluations, progress reports, and team meetings, inclusion opportunities, operations and planning, and then some just general informational areas. So if you have any follow-up questions, first of all, thank you for your participation. It's not easy to sort of sit and encompass 60 minutes of time in this way. So thank you for your participation. If you have any specific individual questions for your particular set of circumstances or situation, please contact our special education leadership team. Meredith Foy is our special ed administrator for pre-K to grade 3. So that's AES and FES. Ashley Boulay this year will be at Grace, grades 4 and 5, and also Apponequet. So that's 9 to 12 plus, our special population of students. And Allie Flynn, Dr. Flynn, will be the psychologist school chair at the middle school. However, she comes back on the 31st, and I am handling any administrative questions for grades 6, 7, and 8. You can find our information on eCurlan, Kurlan, at freelake.org. And you have Meredith M. Foy, Foye, at freelake.org, and A. Boulay, Bouley, at freelake.org. We thank you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. We've covered a lot. If we have to cover more, we can certainly address those questions. But thank you for your time and participation, and best wishes for a very safe and productive fall for your students and your families. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Crystal Ng, and I am co-chair with Melissa for CPAC. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who sent in questions. I tried to group them as best I could. Obviously, all the questions were not answered today. So if you do have questions, I do suggest that you get back to Liz and Meredith and Ashley. If you need anything from CPAC, please just email us, the general email, cpac@freelake.org. You can also post whatever you need to post on our Facebook page, and you can contact me that way. Pretty much everybody in the district has my phone number, so it's 508-965-4629. You can text me. And I just want to say thank you all. I saw 58 people, and I thought that was amazing. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.